Good evening. Imagine a world where 5 low-resolution images of your face can determine with 91% accuracy, if you're a man, slightly less if you're a woman, whether you're gay or not. And before you say you don't care, you don't judge, and if you were gay, you don't care, all that stuff, just remember that there are 10 countries in the world today where it's a crime punishable by death to be gay. So think about the implications of that technology. Imagine a world where Google has a patent on an in-home device that can detect whether alcohol is being consumed in the house, whether smoking is going on, whether curse words are being used, what the emotional state of the occupants is. They do that by looking at your facial expression and analyzing your voice tone. Whether teeth are being brushed, and if so, for how long, and if so, whether the water is being left to run during the teeth brushing. And before you say, that's just a great way of helping me monitor my kids, remember that if they're monitoring your kids, they're monitoring you. Now, I'm sure you get this all the time. But why do I care about privacy? I got nothing to hide. I don't care if people see what I buy. I live this boring life. And when people say that to me, I say to them, well, the point is it's not just about you. It's about society. And I apologize, you're a group of professionals, but I'm just going to go through a couple of these examples because I find them interesting. So we all know about geofencing, but there was a case last year in Massachusetts in April 2017 that settled with the Massachusetts AG and a firm that was putting geofences around reproductive health centers around the country and targeting women, not just any women, but abortion-minded women who went into those clinics and giving them live chat offers, right-to-life live chat offers. And no matter where you stand on the pro-life, pro-choice spectrum, many people find that's pretty invasive use of the technology. In-home devices, they know, for example, where your phones sleep. And so your phones normally sleep you and your partner in one place, and all of a sudden one phone's sleeping downstairs, and the algorithm knows before you've told anybody else in your life that your relationship's in trouble. Wearables, we all like to make sure we get our number of steps in. But just remember, speaking of couples, they know everything that you're doing. And before you say, no, my partner and I would take our Fitbits off before we did anything, just remember, by definition, they know when you're wearing them and when you're not. And when two people take them off together, they know that. These people are not stupid. This information has value. And by the way, it's not covered by HIPAA. Autos, they know how much you weigh, how fast you drive, how hard you brake. That's a good one for your risk tolerance when the people are lending to you. When you go to work, if you get fired. Voting is, for me, the most alarming one. If less than 100,000 votes separated the last two candidates in the last presidential election in 3 states. This is not a boil the ocean problem. This is not a very difficult problem. They're talking about convincing a relatively tiny fraction of the voters in a handful of states to either come out and vote or stay home. And remember, these companies know everybody intimately. They know who's a racist, who's a misogynist, who's a homophobe, who's a conspiracy theorist. They know the lazy people and the gullible people. They have access to the greatest trove of personal information that's ever been assembled. They have the world's best data scientists. And they have essentially a frictionless way of communicating with you. This is a trivial problem. It's also power. And as I always say, Standard Oil was a powerful corporation, but it didn't know everything about you. So that's why I got involved. In 2015, I kind of got interested in this. And a friend of mine and I, his name is Rick Arney, and he's a dad at my son's school. And so we got dads together, and we started talking about this and I decided to do an initiative. And after about 1.5 years of research, we ended up on these 3 things. Transparency, sort of the right to know what information's been collected about you. The right to say no, control, allowing you to tell the companies to stop selling your information. And then just accountability. Please keep my information safe. And so we spent 1.5 years researching it. We spent 6 months writing it at the end of 2017. Everybody says it came together in like 2 days. It's not true. We spent 6 months writing it. We went through multiple drafts with the Attorney General. And this is what you do. literally, it's not an e-thing or anything. You actually put a hard copy across the desk in Sacramento. That's not my hand, that's a courier's hand. But, and then that was right before Thanksgiving last year. And then you wait, I don't know, about a month, and you get what's called the title and summary from the Attorney General, and then you're legally allowed to go start gathering signatures. So January of this year, we started gathering signatures, and on the left, that's the actual petition that you've got to go get people to sign. Now, legally, we needed 366,000 signatures. That's a percentage of the last vote in the last gubernatorial election. We decided to try to aim for 577,000. You want to go over because there's an error, a random count method. This is when it started to get a little more real and not quite so much kind of fun. Every week you'd get this thing from this, on the right was a spreadsheet I would get from the signature gathering firm. You have to hire a firm, you can't do this by yourself. And it would be sort of this list of how many signatures they'd gotten. And that's literally all I ever saw. I never saw ballots, I never saw petitions. So you sort of have to take them on their word, and you have to wire the money once a week. Now it's publicly disclosed at that point, so I was starting to get press, and as you can guess, I'm kind of a private person. I didn't really want that. The parents in my kids' school kind of wondering what I was doing. And the other thing is, it's just kind of binary. Like, you're not like getting half a house. Either this works or it doesn't. This could all just be, a big waste of time. So that was sort of not so much fun. Then the opposition committee got formed, and this was also not so much fun. And I'm not a billionaire, and this was it's still kind of, when I think about the list of companies arrayed against us, that was not great. My personal low moment came early this year. I'd always thought that what would happen is a billionaire would come along and kind of adopt the initiative. What happens in California a lot of the time is someone comes up with an idea, they put a ballot measure together, and then someone comes along and says, oh, I'll put the money in, and it becomes their initiative, sort of. So like the marijuana initiative that everybody says is Sean Parker's, he wasn't the proponent, but he gave all the money and it became his. So I thought that's what would happen. And I actively tried to pursue that. And so I, the Bay Area being what it is, I called someone and, finally got a hold of somebody and got an appointment and went in to see a very wealthy billionaire, not Sean Parker. And I had my little meeting and I gave my pitch. And at the end of it, he's like, this is great. And I never forget what he said. He said, you're going to be proud of for the rest of your life you did this. And I thought, great, this is going well. And I said, so, will you support me? And he looked at me, he's like, oh, I couldn't support you. And I said, why? And he's like, well, these companies are really powerful. They could really hurt my business. And I thought, your business? And then he looks at me on cue and he says, how's your business doing, Alastair? And I looked at him and I said, how should it be doing? And he said, these companies are not run by nice people. He used a little more colorful phrase than that. And on the way down the elevator from that meeting, I remember, I kind of wanted to throw up. I just thought, what have I done to my life? I had this idea, and it was a good idea, and I'm a tiny little business person. And there's a little thought exercise here. If you're a business person, how many other businesses can unilaterally put you out of business? Let's say you need customers coming in the door. So the utility could, but they can't really, because you can go to the regulator and say, hey, turn my gas back on or turn my electricity back on. They're targeting me because they don't like my political stance. But there's one business who can do that. And there's no fingerprints, right? So that kind of freaked me out. I didn't think it would happen. I think we have the free press. I think any of these big search businesses or social media companies would not do that. But it still is a possibility. So I stopped sleeping for the next couple of months. This happened, and it wasn't good for the people whose data was leaked, but at the same time, it stopped people asking me what I was doing with my life. People kind of were like, oh, I get it now. And so we got our signatures in May. And California has a process where, it's a relatively new process, didn't used to be like this, where if a proponent like me, you can get your signatures, but you have a time until when you can actually withdraw your ballot. So for me, it's a statutory time based on when your ballot qualified. But so for me, it was June 20, 8th at 5 p.m. And up till then, I could withdraw the ballot. Now, presumably, the reason they do this law is that the legislature will step in, pass a law, and convince the proponent to withdraw their ballot. The idea being that then you get one more expensive ballot fight off the ballot, and people don't hate the legislature as much. So I started getting calls from the legislature, and this, on the left-hand slide there, the person on the left is Assemblymember Chow, but behind him, with his glasses on his head, that's Senator Bob Hertzberg, and if any of you know him, he's a force of nature. This is the craziest small world story. He knew my college roommate and my best man just because he used to go on some business retreat weekend with the guy. So I guess he made a call and figured out that I was a reasonable person. So he starts calling me. And that was May. And I didn't honestly think very much of it because the first couple of conversations didn't really go anywhere. And I got a couple of drafts, and they were sort of meaningless, and they didn't have any enforcement. They had nothing. They were just sort of like words on paper. So I was, of course, he's a senator, I returned his calls. It was polite, but I got to know him a little bit, and he's a good guy. And so a week before the deadline, 8 days before the deadline, on Wednesday, before the Thursday deadline, I thought, okay, this is crazy. If we're going to do this, let's at least try. And I went to that office in the middle picture. Full disclosure, that's a totally fake picture. We took it last week. But I did sit in that seat, and that's my attorney right there, James Harrison, who sat beside me. So other than the shirts, it's probably the same, and expressions on our face. And we sat there for 10 hours on a Wednesday, going back and forth with Sacramento, talking, and we basically came up with a deal where we took away certain things, but we got certain things. We got the right to see all your information, we got the right to deletion, we got the right to change the age of kid opt-in from 13 to 16, and then we pared back the right of private action. So that was Thursday, and we spent a weekend negotiating it. It was a crazy weekend up till all hours with different elected members on the phone. But on Monday morning, on the 25th, we had a deal that tech would accept. That was always, there was tech on one side, these guys in the middle, and us on the other. At which point my wife kicked me out of the house and said, go to Sacramento, you've been working on this for 2.5 years. Don't come back without a vote, a positive vote. So I went up there and I walked up and down the halls and just kind of walked into offices and said, hey, this is who I am. I think you should vote for this deal. And that's, on the right-hand side, that's the night before the vote. And that's us vote counting, just hoping that we had enough votes. So the next day is June 28th. Our deadline's 5 p.m. to withdraw, or not. But actually, we had less than that because we'd heard from the governor that he was leaving for a fundraiser at 2:30. And Jerry doesn't, he marches to his own drummer. He sent no messages that he was going to stick around for this. So we knew, okay, that's 2:30. And then because the law hadn't been agreed to, our deal hadn't been agreed to till Monday morning, there's a rule in California, you can't vote on a bill until it's been in print for 72 hours. So legally, we couldn't actually they couldn't start debating it on the floor of the Senate until 10:47. So we had this little window to get this thing done. So on the left is a picture, that's Rick Arne I was telling you about. He's a fellow who helped me all the way through, and that's my wife and I. And then the middle picture is my wife and I, and some of you may know him, Ashkan Sultani. He's a former chief technologist at the FTC, and he helped us all the way through with a technological side of things. And on the right, very small, is Bob Hertzberg waiting around on the Senate floor for the time to go so we could introduce this. And of course, 1047 comes along, and we're nowhere near it because we're in the middle of this huge fight between the Republicans and the Democrats over some soda tax. And I mean, it was epic. The Republicans storm off the floor, they call emergency caucuses, everybody's texting me being like, we've never seen this before. I mean, they're just hurling insults at each other on the floor. Like, Madam Speaker, I've never seen anything like this in all my years. So I think, okay, this is not going well. And I don't actually think that they took it up till noon. So at this point, I think, I didn't know what to think. And then, I will say when government does act, it acted quickly. And the next thing that happened, which I had never really expected, if this works, there we go, is it passed unanimously out of both houses, which I had not really expected to see. And it was kind of one of those moments that sort of sent chills down your spine as you watched the vote. It read the name aye, aye. And then after that, we went down to the governor's office and went in and asked if we could watch him sign it. And they looked at us, and they actually were nice, and they were like, we'll go ask. Like, they came back like, no. So anyway, then we went back upstairs, and there's Chow in his office finding out. That was me. I was sitting on some stairs trying to write something for the press conference because I realized I hadn't done that. And I was there when the governor's office called me to say that he'd signed it. And that was a moment I won't forget. That's a real picture. My wife took that picture. And on the right, us with Hertzberg. And, you know, when that passed and realizing that, you know, 40 million people, 1 in 8 Americans had protections that they hadn't had before, that was a moment that I won't soon forget either. So the thing about this journey is, I still feel very privileged and grateful to have taken it. It's an amazing journey, and I'm still blown away by how much power this country is willing to give its citizens. You know, it's an only in America story, and for those of you who are depressed about the current state of affairs, just think to this summer in Sacramento when the two sides came together and acted as one. And you know, the cynical side of you says, well, they did it so they could come back next spring and got the law. But I'm an optimist, and I tend to think it's because they recognized that privacy is not partisan. And this is a moment in time they wanted to not be on the wrong side of history. And this leads me, I want to just talk about two things, privacy and prosperity, in closing. The first thing is that I think our great experiment is still alive and well, and by that, of course, I mean democracy. Because democracy is not the human history, it's not the norm, right? The norm is power going to individuals and dynasties. And our democracy depends on all of us every day trying to build it. And one of those essential building blocks is privacy. Without privacy, there really isn't any democracy. And it's so essential that our founders recognized this. And so the right to be left alone in your home and to keep your papers to yourself and keep your opinions and your thoughts, and even the right to keep what you know you've done to yourself. All those rights are enshrined in the Bill of Rights. Because again, without that, there isn't any democracy. But also, without prosperity, there's no democracy. We all know that given the choice between food and freedom, we know where everybody's going to vote. So you have these two things, prosperity and privacy. And the things that have kind of been driving me crazy recently is that somehow there's this narrative that they're not compatible. That you got to have privacy, you got to have prosperity, and if you have too much privacy, how many times have people told me, don't kill the innovation engine of America? We know best. Don't let the civilians come in. Don't let the government people come in, because they're going to ruin our business. Just leave us alone. We're really smart computer scientists, and we know how to do this. And this is much too complicated for you. Well, I'm here to say I'm not a buyer of that narrative. I'm a business person. I feel like I'm as pro-commerce as they come. And I just don't see how good privacy isn't good business. I think it is good business, and I think that the companies that get it will do well, because I think there's a sea change going on. And I think this is where you all come in. You've chosen to devote your lives to this area. And on your shoulders rests making sure that this essential building block of democracy stays intact. So when you go back to work next week, remember, it's not just a job. And when the complaints roll in about you being a cost center, or about the fact that, it's hard to comply with these laws, push back. Ask these people what kind of a society they want to live in, what kind of a society they want to leave for their kids. Because remember, you're not just working for your company. Companies come and go. But you have an amazing responsibility. So much rests on your shoulders. And I just want to remind you, it's not just a job. Because if you're protecting privacy, you're protecting democracy. If you're a guardian of privacy, you're a guardian of democracy. And that is the worthiest of causes. Thank you so much.